So the funny thing is that the title of this talk is English. The abstract I sent in was German. I can see there are people here who might not be so familiar with German. I will try to do it in English. But I have a few Alexa examples that have been recorded. I didn't bring in Alexa because it never works. I have it recorded there in German, but I think we will get along just fine. So thanks everyone. I'm going to, I don't know, most probably there's an English analogy where you can vote if something really sucks. And I mean, Lotus Notes is a real favorite, and many more. Many of these classic applications develop how we design and develop software, but also how software is being used. And we try, in domain-driven design, we try to go into the domain itself, into the user's mind, into the user's context, which is a very, very interesting and important term, context, in domain-driven design. And language, which is a very important term in domain-driven design, but in software development in general. And with the new ways of interacting with computers that are coming, in terms of voice UIs, in terms of chatbots, everything that we consider around conversational UIs, where we don't have a screen and a mouse or our finger to tap, but we interact by just speaking to the world. We have even more the necessity to think about, to reason about, how does the user interact with our piece of software, with the application, and with the overall system. Because a piece of software very often is not isolated anymore. A piece of software very often is part of a bigger system, of a larger system. The system may be explicit in terms of we build a system, but the system may be implicit as well, because from the user's point of view, it's just part of their ecosystem. If I use my application, I have my phone, I have a calendar app on there. But this calendar app communicates with all kinds of systems, explicitly. But on the other hand, I have other apps that in my head integrate with my schedule. So I have connections in my head that the software itself and the system that has been designed doesn't really know about. If I have a screen-based user interface, I present the user with limitations, with boundaries, wherein they can act and interact, but there is a limited amount of possibilities what they can do. If I talk to a user, to a conversational interface, I can say whatever I want. And I can't see the boundaries and the limitations of my options. And this makes voice UI and conversational UI in general very interesting to build. We can't just take our websites or our mobile phone applications and move them into Alexa or Google Home or Siri or other devices. We have to think about how does the user interact. Back in the day when we started, I built my first website in 1994. And back in the day, nobody really knew what this new internet thing was about and the World Wide Web. But everybody started to move into the web. So every company, every organization needed a website, a homepage. That's what they called it back then. Needed a homepage. And a homepage basically was the print brochures put onto a screen, which didn't really work because it were different media. But over time, they learned that this doesn't work. So over time, we found a way of interacting in a different way with this new user interface. And then we had mobile devices. And everybody started just taking what they had on the screen and putting it on mobile devices. Does anybody remember Windows Mobile? Where you had this tiny start button somewhere, and you basically had your big screen on your tiny screen, and it didn't really work. And over time, we learned that mobile devices are a completely different way to promote a completely different way of interacting. And Apple, especially with the iPhone, created a new paradigm and a new way of dealing with it, with even gestures, new things. Like, we don't have a pen, well, now we have again, but we don't have a pen that replaces our mouse. We have our fingers, and we swipe, and we turn and drag, and all these things, all these new ways of interacting. Even some devices even recognize our eyes and our eye movement. And just as we can't simply take a brochure or a print catalog and put it on a screen to make a website, and just as we can't just take a website or an OS, an operating system, and put it on a mobile device, we can't just take a screen and replace it with the voice interface that we talk to. This shift is even larger than from visual device to visual device. We have a huge shift, and I'm convinced that communication via voice will be a whole new paradigm, because this is the way we have communicated for ages. We have been talking to each other long before we have used visual tools, long before we were able to draw and symbolize and write. And for us human beings, it's very natural to use language. Much more natural than to move our hand and point and click. But voice UIs pose various kinds of challenges, and I have brought one example. As I said, it's pre-recorded because I don't trust technology. And because it's, I've just taken a human resources application, and an employee, she got married, so I have to change some data about her, and I'm an HR employee, and I have to do this via a voice interface, and because it's rather complicated, I brought a script, which I still need. And this is going to be in German. Does anybody not understand German? Okay, good. So, Alexa, starte Personalverwaltung.
Willkommen bei der Personalverwaltung. Was möchten Sie tun? Sagen Sie Mitarbeiter bearbeiten, Mitarbeiter suchen, Gehälter auszahlen, Bericht erstellen oder beenden.
Mitarbeiter bearbeiten.
Bitte nennen Sie die Personalnummer des Mitarbeiters.
Personalnummer. Shit, I only have the name.
Bitte nennen Sie die Personalnummer des Mitarbeiters.
Sorry.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Yeah, I clicked too much. So she asked again, I wasn't able to respond because I don't have the Personalnummer, the personnel ID. So I said abbrechen, cancel. And she wrote again, okay, Alexa, starte Personalverwaltung.
Willkommen bei der Personalverwaltung. Was möchten Sie tun? Sagen Sie Mitarbeiter bearbeiten, Mitarbeiter suchen, Gehälter auszahlen, Bericht erstellen.
Mitarbeiter suchen.
Bitte nennen Sie den Namen des Mitarbeiters.
Marianne Schröder.
Ich habe 2 Mitarbeiter mit dem Namen Marianne Schröder. Personalnummer 123, geboren am 10. August 1970, Vertriebsassistentin, und Personalnummer 456, geboren am 13. Januar 1997, Praktikantin in der Buchhaltung.
So I'm looking for the one in sales, but she told me the number first, the ID first, before telling me what it's about. It's very difficult because I have to keep everything in my head. But I remembered, it's 123. 123.
Bitte nennen Sie die Personalnummer des Mitarbeiters.
I just did that. 123.
Der Datensatz 123 Marianne Schröder kann nun bearbeitet werden. Welches Feld möchten Sie bearbeiten?
Nachname.
Bitte buchstabieren Sie den neuen Wert für das Feld Nachname.
SCHULZ.
Der neue Wert für das Feld Nachname lautet Schulz. Ist das richtig?
Ja.
Der Datensatz 123 Marianne Schulz wurde geändert. Möchten Sie ein weiteres Feld ändern oder den Datensatz schließen?
Weiteres Feld ändern.
Der Datensatz 123 Marianne Schulz kann nun bearbeitet werden. Welches Feld möchten Sie bearbeiten?
Lohnsteuerklasse.
Ich kann das Feld Lohnsteuerklasse nicht finden. Welches Feld möchten Sie bearbeiten?
Steuerklasse.
Bitte buchstabieren Sie den neuen Wert für das Feld Steuerklasse.
4.
Der neue Wert für das Feld Steuerklasse lautet 4, ist das richtig?
Ja.
Der Datensatz 123 Marianne Schulz wurde geändert. Möchten Sie ein weiteres Feld ändern oder den Datensatz schließen?
Datensatz schließen.
Was möchten Sie tun? Sagen Sie Mitarbeiter bearbeiten, Mitarbeiter suchen, Gehälter auszahlen, Bericht erstellen oder beenden.
Beenden.
Die Personalverwaltung wurde beendet. Es war schön, mit Ihnen zu arbeiten.
Ja.
Ich hoffe, wir sprechen uns bald wieder.
Yeah, right. So, this is how we interact with our data. This is what domain-driven design has been working on to overcome, because in our heads, and we've taught our users that we think in terms of tables and records and changing and CRUD, creating, reading, updating, deleting, and we basically just took this model, this paradigm, and put it on the screen. Domain-driven design is trying to overcome this, but still many applications are not built in this way. And if we just take them and put them into a voice or a chat-based interaction model, it will become even worse. And we have certain challenges in Voice UI. The first challenge is simply accents and dialects. I've grown up in southern Germany where people have a really, really strong dialect, and every village has their own dialect. And then again, if I need to speak English with an application, my English, I've got a German accent. Have you ever talked to an IVR, to a telephone application that tries to lead you, to guide you through a menu to deal with a company or an operator or something like that? I had my electricity utility provider. I had an issue and I tried to call them. And every time I called, they were busy, and the IVR told me, please hold the line. The next place is reserved for you. Please hold the line. The next place is reserved for you. Please hold the line. After 4 minutes, it said, we're sorry, there's nobody available right now. Please call again. And it cut off the line. It did this exactly after 4 minutes, every time I called. And every time I called, it told me that I would be the next in line. But I never was. It always, after 4 minutes, cut off.
And you had to pay, right?
No, I didn't have to pay. Luckily, I didn't have to pay. But this is so badly designed because it not only I don't know. So we have the first challenge, which would be language and accents, but I'm getting into the other thing in a second. The next challenge for voice UIs is noisy surroundings. Voice UIs can be used in different, or can be used in a very good way, for instance, in work surroundings where you don't have your hands available, where you need to work with your hands and talk with the computer. But if you're, for instance, in the cockpit of an airplane, or in a subwater, I don't know how you call it, Taucherglocke is the term. If you're diving, you can't really work with a screen, but you could talk. But maybe you have machinery surrounding you, or you are in an environment where it's very difficult to recognize speech and to understand speech. The third, and this is something that comes into play with domain-driven design, is the actual context. When I'm dealing with an application, I am in a certain context, and I might switch the context. Given the HR application, where I want to change some information about a person because they got married, it's a different context than when I want to make sure that the salary gets paid on time. And with a screen-based application, we have a certain amount of context available. So in my head, I don't need to maintain my context because I have it on the screen. And this, whenever I switch context and I switch into a context that the screen doesn't provide, I can't do anything. But when I'm working with a voice application, I can switch context all the time. And I have to remember the context that the computer is in. I have to remember the process that the computer is going through. As I said before, we have when you change an employee's name because they married, you also have to change their Steuerklasse, which is tax class. If you're married, you have to pay different taxes than when you're not. So from a business point of view, from a domain point of view, a marriage always goes along with a change in tax. But I have to remember this. The computer knows it because the computer can validate. When it tries to store the information, it can validate if it works. But because I don't see anything, I have to remember it as well. This is a simple case, but we have sometimes we have very complicated processes and dependencies between pieces of information that need to be touched and need to be changed. So I have to keep this in my mind. I have to keep this in my head, and I can switch context without seeing what contexts are available to me. So I have to keep many things inside my head. And the fourth challenge is simply language. In domain-driven design, we talk about the ubiquitous language, which is context-specific, and we try to narrow down the set of terms that we use to have a common language within our bounded context. With conversational UIs, this doesn't really work. Because even though we might have a ubiquitous language defined and we use it within our application, still the people using the application might use different terms, like Lohnsteuerklasse or Steuerklasse, which both might be valid. But when I'm dealing with a database application that simply lets me change fields, I need to know the term of the field that I want to change. So I, as a user, not only have to keep the context in mind and the process, I also have to keep the glossary of language in my head. And applying domain-driven design to conversational UIs means we have to think the other way around. We have to help the users to not have to keep everything in their mind. We need to guide the user through the application, through the process. We have to capture the intent of what they want to do so that we are able to determine what they will probably say. And I have another example of this Alexa conversation that we had just before, how it might sound if we would have designed it in a domain-driven way, which is Alexa, starte Personalverwaltung.
Willkommen bei der Personalverwaltung. Wie kann ich Ihnen helfen?
And now I could say, no, I just do, Marianne Schröder hat geheiratet. I need to know what I can say, of course, at this instance, but I also could say, help. Or what can I do? Or what are my options? And then she might tell me a menu. I could also design it in the way that the first couple of times that I use the application, it presents me with the options. And after some time, it adapts to me learning and also to what I usually do. So now I say, Marianne Schröder hat geheiratet.
Ich habe 2 Mitarbeiterinnen mit diesem Namen. Meinen Sie Marianne Schröder im Vertrieb oder in der Buchhaltung?
I don't have to deal with personnel numbers. I mean Marianne Schröder im Vertrieb.
Hat Frau Schröder ihren Nachnamen geändert?
Ja. So she recognizes the fact that she married, so it could be that she changed her last name. Ja.
Schulz, wie man
Oh,
es
I'm sorry.
spricht, oder möchten Sie es buchstabieren?
I went too far. I would have said ja, sie heißt jetzt Schulz. I could also have said ja, and then the application would recognize the fact that I didn't say the new last name and would ask me for it. But I could also say the last name in this instance, and she would recognize it. And what she just said was Schulz, wie man es spricht, Schulz, as it's pronounced, or do you want to spell it? So I don't have to spell every simple name. But if it's spelled differently than it's being pronounced, I have the option to do so. So, wie man es spricht.
Ihre bisherige Steuerklasse war 1, was ist die neue Steuerklasse?
3.
Vielen Dank. Marianne Schröder hat geheiratet und heißt jetzt Marianne Schulz. Ihre neue Steuerklasse lautet 3, ist das richtig?
So I have a confirmation, yes. Ja.
Soll ich eine Glückwunschkarte oder Blumen vorbereiten?
Nein, danke.
Okay. Kann ich noch etwas für Sie tun?
Nein.
Schön. Dann bis bald.
This was a completely different kind of conversation. It had a natural flow. I had options, but I did not need to know which options I had, except by which specific task I wanted to accomplish. To tell my system that Marianne Schröder has been married. And the system knows which information is being needed. The system knows how to go through the process. The system is capable of understanding what I'm saying so that I don't have to spell everything. I could, but I don't need to. The system knows that if somebody gets married, you might want to congratulate in a certain way. If you have just a data entry, you have to deal with all this information. And we had a very longish, frustrating process versus a flow. And this flow is possible because we apply the principles of domain-driven design. Because we understand and capture the intent and not just modify data. Because changing the last name could have two reasons, two very separate reasons. One could be because somebody got married or divorced. The other could be because I'm fixing a typo. From a process perspective, they are completely different. This is why we talk about task-based UIs. This is why we try to capture the intent. What does the user want to do? Do they want to do base data management and fix a typo? Or do they want to kick off a process that needs to be done because somebody got married? And there's all kinds of things that need to be done when somebody gets married, behind just modifying data. And this is how important domain-driven design is when it comes to voice-based applications. We as users, we as human beings are psychologically wired to deal with language. We as human beings, when we're dealing with technology and technology doesn't do what we want it to do, we get somewhat frustrated, sometimes mad. And there are certain videos on YouTube about people who got really mad about technology. Once we hear a human voice, it gets even worse. Because even though we know we're talking to a machine in the frontal cortex, back of our brain hears a human voice, so it thinks we are dealing with a human person. And we have certain expectations towards human beings. And these expectations are much higher than the expectations that we have towards technology. And when we hear a human voice, we completely naturally create feelings, which is far below our consciousness. We create feelings and we can't do anything about it. We just do it. And the feelings we create when somebody just doesn't understand what we're trying to say are not very positive. We get mad, we get frustrated, and if we as software designers and developers create applications that make the users mad and frustrated, we would better do something else, because we're not helping anyone. We're making the world worse by making people feel bad. So it's our responsibility to make people feel good about themselves, feel smart enough to deal with technology. Technology is supposed to make life simpler. Technology is supposed to help us accomplish things. It's not supposed to make us feel bad about the thing and about ourselves. Voice UI and conversational UI in general, but specifically voice UI, has real potential. I used to work for a company that supported medical staff during the Ebola outbreak in Africa a few years ago. And you can imagine if you're a doctor and you have these people, the patients, in their quarantine tents, in these big quarantine tents, somewhere in the heat and the humid, and the sun's blasting onto the tents, and there's extreme heat everywhere and extreme humidity everywhere. But you can't just go in there because it's contagious. So you have to wear these hazmat suits, and you have to wear 3 layers of rubber gloves as a doctor to not get infected. And you go into the tent in this heat of 40 degrees centigrade inside your hazmat suit. You can't stay in there very long. Your mask blurs, you get really hot, extremely hot, so you have to work efficiently. You have to work quickly, because after 5 minutes you have to get out. And when you go in there, you can't bring a device or a notepad or something like that, but you have to document what you're doing somehow. So you can't bring anything in there, because when you get back out, everything that gets back out has to go through this decontamination process. So with these huge rubber gloves and these hazmat suits and the limited amount of time that you have available, you have to somehow work. And you can't work with a keyboard. And you can't really work with a touch-based device. And this is what the company I used to work for helped with: create a touch-based application that has big buttons that you can fat finger to be able to do your work. But using this kind of UI limited what they actually could do in a very, very serious way. But they at least were able to use these devices that were inside the tents and stayed inside the tents and do at least a limited amount of calling up information about the patients and documenting certain very simple things, predetermined things. What if I would go in there as a doctor and I would just say, inside my helmet there's a microphone, and I would just say, bring up the information for patient number, and I have the patient number. And I've got a big screen, and I've got all the information on the screen. And then I go down to the patient and look in their eyes and do my diagnostic, my examination. And I just talk. I just talk to the interface. Like, the eyes, the pupils have narrowed, the fever has gone down or up, increase medication by whatnot. So I'm able to, while I'm doing the examination, just to speak into the device. And the device doesn't necessarily need to understand everything, because once I go back out, I can sit down at the computer and go through my protocol. It has been sorted out and it has been understood, most of it, but if it misunderstood something, I can still fix it. But in this way, I'm able to do much more work with the actual patients, instead of trying to deal with technology. This is a huge potential in these kinds of environment to work with voice UIs, in aviation, in space. Luftfahrt? I'm missing the term. No, Raumfahrt. I'm talking about Raumfahrt. Aviation and Raumfahrt. Whatever. Yeah, saying aerospace. So in aerospace, you have environments where you can't really use your hands, especially when you're outside your vessel and working on it. When you're working underwater, when you're working with heavy machinery, when you're in a medical environment, when you're in... I used, back in my former life, I used to fix airplanes, especially business jets, and they are not that big. And if you try, I worked with the avionics, with the electrical and electronic systems, and you have to, in some aircraft, you have to really go into the belly of the aircraft, and then you can try to loosen a screw to get the device out. But you don't really know which screw is it. So you need a piece of paper, and you might have to look at something, you might have to call up some information, you might even want to document something. What about having some kind of headset, and I'm being able, I need to know the location of whatever, and I have it on my screen, and I can see it. But I can't tap it or type it or something. I just need to know the information, and I can just say, I need the location off. Or I need, since we're all dealing with IoT and sensors throughout our machinery and throughout our vehicles, we have lots of information about the condition of parts. What if I could just get this information when I need it? We have so many, we talk about conversational UI, we talk about voice UI mostly in terms of consumer goods, in terms of smart home, smart car, which is the consumer side, which most probably will make it, will give voice as an interface, will give it the necessary push to bring it into the mainstream. But the real applications are not in my home. The real applications are in the industry. The real applications are everywhere where I don't want to use my hands, or where I simply can't use my hands. So voice UI brings a huge potential in helping people do their work and helping people feel comfortable in their smart homes and in their smart cars. What we as developers need to do to not fail at this and to not make it even worse for the users is to find a way to anticipate how the user thinks, what they want to do, how they want to do it, and to take the burden of their shoulders into our applications, to understand the context they're in, domain-driven design, bounded context, to understand the intent that they have, to understand the language that they use, but not in terms of a narrowed down ubiquitous language, but in terms of the richness of the natural language. We have lots of AI and speech recognition systems at our fingertips with cloud-based services by the big providers, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, IBM. We can use it. We don't have to deal with the technicalities of voice recognition and the technicalities of actual understanding the semantics. What we have to do, what we really need to do, is make working simpler, not more difficult, is to make living and interacting with technology, what we do all the time, simpler, not more difficult. And this is why I'm really happy that domain-driven design has been around for like 15 years now, and we have thought about moving away from data-driven, data-centric modeling of software systems to domain-centric modeling of software systems. And now we need to take what we've learned throughout the last 15 years and think about new paradigms of interaction. And think about how what we've learned in the past 15 years will help make technology really usable for those who want to use it, and for those many people who can't help but need to use it. And this is our responsibility as software developers. Thank you.
We've got time for questions.